Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. We are officially restarting this session. We are getting into the questions and answers session. I just had a chat with the chairs, and it seems like it went more than good. Fantastic. Like I always say, it is really good, at least to see you virtually in these COVID conditions. And we wish that the next time be face-to-face here in New Zealand. So fantastic. So what is going to happen now? I'm going to go from session 1 to session 2 to ask the chairs just a little bit who were they chairing and introducing those speakers. Just for a second, for the speakers to have 1 or 2 sentences of their talk to prompt discussion and dialogue. And these questions and answers will last around 30 minutes. And after that, we just close and invite to the next Monday. Before I forget, Julia is going to put in the chat a questionnaire that is requested by one of our main funders, OECD CRP, and it's about how this online workshop is working now. So it is an experience for us, and hopefully this sort of experience became more and more relevant and more feasible in the future. Although it may stop us to get together face-to-face, something that I don't like, but what can we do, right? So the first session of the day, I chair first stream 1, which had Professor Hirani Matunga from Lincoln University. Hirani talked about what he said, a made-up word, indigenous scapes. And I remember our conversations about that with Carol when we started to talk about these sort of issues, and we have a fruitful discussion through emails. So who was the chair of stream 2 in session 1 can introduce the speakers of that stream and let the speakers introduce themselves later on.
So I think I was chairing stream 2, which was Dr. Catherine Tozer from Ag Research, and she was talking to us about vegetation options for increasing resilience in pastoral hill country. Catherine, are you still around? Do you want to just quickly give a summary of what you talked about?
Looking at 2 options. One's working with the pasture that is there and looking at deferred grazing. So that's working with the pasture community within it to shift the botanical composition and increase the tillering, and looking at what that means for the whole farm system. And it's helping particularly resilience by helping to mitigate stresses, particularly over summer drought. The second one was looking at increasing the forage supply in the vertical plane. How can we integrate woody forages into the hill country systems? So that's got the benefits above and also below ground in terms of the soil stabilisation.
That's very good. So in my talk, Hirani, would you like to say some words about this stream 1, and then we go to stream 3?
If I summarise what I was trying to get across, and this notion of ko te whenua ko te whenua ko, and I suppose what I'm advocating is that it's been quite interesting listening to some of the presentations around pasture, grazing, animal welfare, farm systems and all that. And I suppose what I'm trying to indicate is that all of these places have a history. And they have indigenous communities generally, if we're talking about, countries like New Zealand, Australia, North, South America. They have indigenous communities that have existed in those places, and I suppose what I'm trying to say is, how do we locate what we do in a historical context which doesn't necessarily privilege the present, but acknowledges the past and also the future to come. And I suppose that's all I'm saying is how does one farm produce historically and benefit from the knowledges that are embedded in these places that we use for grazing and for production. And I suppose in a nutshell, that's what I'm saying, is there are indigenous knowledges and associations that we can access that give us an amazing insight and amazing knowledge base and an amazing value system. And how do we build that into to whatever it is that we do on the land? And I suppose the value that I articulated was a Māori concept called kaitiakitanga, and that is, how do we act as good guardians and good stewards for these places? In order that we can take what we've inherited from the past and hand on to future generations. And as we know, there's an existential crisis facing this planet, and it's around environmental quality, it's around water supply, soil fertility. We all know the story, but how do we draw on the knowledge systems that are in these places to help pave a pathway for the future? I mean, that in very general terms, because I think what I was trying to get across.
Thank you very much, Hirani. So now we go to stream 3. I think we told this here, but the stream 3, the session 1 had Carol Smith. Carol, I don't see you here. Well, I know you're being busy, but what Carol was presenting was about soil resilience and the work she's doing with some of our students as well, and how we increase soil resilience in our lands. So Carol is about to submit the paper, so we'll have more information about Carol's talks as she submits the paper and we go through that. So now we move to session 2. So the session 2 has 3 streams. I chair the stream 1 that has Juan Villalba and Xavier Manteca. We've got the session stream 2 that had Daniel 14 and Namhish, sorry Namhish if I mispronounce your name, that was chaired by Hamish, and stream 3 that had Cameron Clark and Derek Bailey, that was chaired by Danita. So now I may ask for Juan and Xavi to put a few sentences of your talk, and then we go to stream 2 and stream 3.
Okay, yeah, so our presentation, so the first one was for looking at introducing more diversity into our pasture lands. So we see this monotony that comes from rangelands, particularly, but also on pasture lands, but on rangelands in particular, we have this issue of grasses and invasive species that create these monotonous landscapes. And the idea that we developed, it's been to create these islands of diversity within this monotony. So looking at issues of plant species identity, trying to identify those species that provide not only nutrients, but nutraceuticals to the animals, and not only livestock, but wild species and pollinators and insects in general. So we can create enhanced ecosystem services, and then the issues that come with these benefits, not just in terms of environmental impacts, nutrition, biodiversity, but also animal welfare, and those ideas we've been working and in collaboration with Javier. And then I give his second presentation emphasizing this critical topic on diverse chemoscapes and animal welfare.
Go ahead, Xavi.
Yeah, thank you, Pablo and Juan. Yeah, the second talk basically look into the concept and importance of animal welfare. And then we discuss the problems and benefits of extensive systems from an animal welfare standpoint. There are obviously problems in extensive systems, which are mainly related to predation, neonatal mortality, harsh climatic conditions, and sometimes lack of food and water. But on the other hand, extensive systems can provide and very often provide important benefits for welfare. One of them is that they allow animals to express their natural behavior. And beyond that, they provide diversity, choice, and challenges. And diversity has specific benefits because it allows us to cater for the individual differences in requirements, in preferences, and also it has some more general benefits because it prevents animals from experiencing boredom. And finally, challenges. We have shown that challenges have a positive effect on the mental state of the animals. And all this is even more important because diversity and challenges may improve the functioning of some brain areas that allow animals to control the stress response. And that in turn benefits the welfare of the animal and its ability to cope with its environment, which is basically the definition of animal welfare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xavi. Yes, your talk and Juan were great. So I imagine we'll have a little bit of a discussion later on. So Hamish, all yours. You probably have to act like the speakers as they are not here.
Oh, they're both gone.
Yeah.
Danielle Fortin.
I'm here.
Rashmi.
Rashmi. So I see you now, Rashmi. Sorry.
Yep. So just briefly, Daniel gave us a really interesting talk on applying a quantitative method of tracking and a diffusion model of tracking and assessing the spatial interactions of bison with people, and pointing to some of the mechanisms that could be used to the sort of repetitive use of particular patches and the way that that sort of analysis could be used to channel and adjust the way in which human wildlife interactions could be managed in a more effective way. I don't think I've done it justice at all there because I thought he was here to actually speak to it, but that's a quick sort of summary off the top of my head. I'd just say we had very good discussion after the two speakers, and I'll hand over to Rashmi to summarize what she said.
All right. Apologies in advance if I missed something because it's 4 a.m. here and I've been here from 12:30 a.m. to 4 a.m. So I presented a case of Kanchenjunga National Park, which is a protected area in the Eastern Himalaya in the state of Sikkim, India, where based on the assumption of overgrazing, pastoralists were removed. What I do is I look at the coupling of this pastoral eviction and ecotourism, which has been the conservation model in Himalaya. And I critique this model, saying that it just reproduces a space based on the state's motive, right? And it has long-term social and ecological implications. For the paper that I presented today, I used mixed methods and I discussed social implications like inequality, further marginalization of pastoralists, and the perceived ecological implications, which included negative impacts on biodiversity due to removal of grazing, which the pastoralists believe is negatively influencing the pasture land. And based on the study, I suggest for a participatory approach and designing conservation model where pastoralists are the prime, one of the prime actors. Also, there should be a transboundary planning of these landscapes, given that the landscape goes across 5 countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rashmi. It's been great to have you. And by the way, kudos on you again, because you were one of the young academic awardees. So your work was fantastic. So hopefully this enables us to keep working together and work with Carol and Roy in the near future and the wonderful endeavors that you are starting with them. Of course, I want to visit you sooner rather than later. I can't deny my interest to go to India. But now, Anita, would you like to introduce my friends Cameron and Derek?
Yeah, thanks, Pablo. So we had Cameron Clark and Derek Bailey talking in our session, and it was really, really great, really interesting, some really great discussion. I'll pass it over to them to sort of summarize their studies. Cameron, do you want to go first? If you're around.
Sure, yeah, I'm here, Anita. So yeah, so my presentation was really honing in on the diversity. Diversity was a key theme for my presentation. Diversity in an indigenous breed of Bangladesh, namely the red chittagong cattle, and the risk that's there. It's a current risk, a real risk around the loss of diversity within that breed, given the challenges that breed has faced through time in terms of disease and nutrition, and what has happened due to that challenge in terms of the ability of that animal to be resilient in that system. So the learnings that we could take from that indigenous breed, its diversity within the challenges of foot and mouth disease, within tuberculosis, within all these huge challenges for our production systems. And it seems that this breed is a lot more resilient than others, particularly cattle such as those from Australia that get imported into that country and tend to not survive. So there was that one thing in terms of diversity between breeds, but also then segueing into the diversity in our, if you like, our more modern breeds that exists around resilience to challenges that we face. And I presented some data on resilience in cattle in feedlot in a very controlled environment, and just showing the diversity and heat resilience that exists within breed, within that one environment in our own modern cattle. So the ability of not only to be resilient, but also to not tolerate that environment as well. So if you like, we have a huge opportunity to explore that resilience, but I guess a general theme to the presentation was the loss in that diversity with our current, I guess it's not really a fault of the current system. It may be a fault in terms of us not being able to generate the phenotype of those animals to be able to reveal that diversity within our modern cattle. So that was Anita. Then we went through to the theme of monitoring and the cost of phenotype monitoring, and that phenotype monitoring going through to an action, and how huge advances have been made in that area, but perhaps not to what they could. So I guess a way forward out of that presentation that I was suggesting would be that we, if you like, the more developed, or if you like, rich countries, I believe have a role here to maintain that diversity within our. Let's just take cattle as an example, where I'm going on a little bit here. I'm not sure how long ago. I'll just keep going until Pablo cuts me off. 75% of cattle are in developing countries. So there's a huge resource there, not only for the people within those countries that we work with, but also for the globe in terms of utilising that diversity for our future scapes in line with the theme of this conference. So that's
fantastic, Cameron. That's great summary. Derek, all yours.
Okay, so I would say one of the things we think is that on rangelands is just a different sort of place than in more intensive operations like feedlots and dairies, and especially the U.S. system of dairies where the cattle come in all the time and there's power and everything else. So it becomes very difficult and labor intensive and expensive to check your livestock, and we don't do a very good job. Often for us, we're real happy if we can check the water every day or two and maybe see the cows every 2 or 3 weeks, and we're real excited. So that leaves real issues with welfare and some of the things that advances in tracking and things and other technologies like even Fitbits for people and tracking of trucks and other commerce is allowing us to develop real-time tracking and real-time monitoring. The technologies there are being developed rapidly, not from the livestock business, but through other technologies, but it gives us a chance to maybe potentially monitor animals in real time. Long ways to go, a lot of cool stuff. These technologies, like Cameron said, are going to give us the chance to really develop phenotypes of individual animals that we never could see before. And we don't see them because we don't watch animals like we used to. But kind of like on diversity, I always tell my students, not all cows are created equal. So there's a lot of variation. We may be able to take advantage of that. Accelerometers, tracking, may be able to tell us when animals are sick. On animal sensors, may be able to also help us when there's out of water. May be able to help us decide when to move our livestock and find out when animals may be damaging watersheds by watching their congregation near streams and maybe identify places where nutrients are being concentrated. The problem is cost. There's a lot of work to be done on AI to interpret the data, present the data, but it's exciting. We're on the cusp of it. Just like Cameron said, it's a cool time, exciting time, and these new technologies may work out really well and give us a chance to do some new exciting stuff, especially when combined with advancements in genomics.
Thank you very much, Derek. That's wonderful. As I said to Juan and Xavi before, you are one of the ones that we are all learning from. And I remember a long time ago, contact you, I keep learning from you, Derek. So I don't know if you comment on the work that you're doing with the right animal for the right landscape. We had some things going on here with a former student of mine and a current student of mine in doing similar things, just emulating your work but in deer. So have you dealt with that in your talk, or can we think of the right animal for the right landscape?
Right. That's what the technology is what could maybe make it even more practical. Real time, if we can keep tracking, we can get the phenotypes and do that. And I'm all excited to work with you. You guys have got a lot of tracking data, genotype data, and we may be able to develop the right critter, the right animal, the right cow for the right environment. And since there's so much diversity within the livestock breeds, we may be able to really be able to see it. And the more we have technologies to do it, the more differences we see. And there's a good, just like everything, it's both nature and nurture. Just the nature, genetics is often a cheaper and making more progress than the learning part, just because selecting bulls is so much faster genetic progress. So it's an exciting time. We're looking forward to doing it. Hopefully we get a chance to get some work with you and get some more of that done. It's an exciting time, really exciting time.
So thank you, Derek. So comments, questions to the speakers. I got more. I hopefully one of my students, Kona, is here as well. I don't see her, but I know she's got some comments. But the door and the table is open for questions to the speakers, discussion, etc., etc. Good to see you, Carol, there.
Okay, I kind of got a half comment, half question, partly off Juan's work looking at these patches of vegetation and the benefits of essentially having areas of monoculture, so single species, and some of your work here, Pablo, as well, showing the benefits of stock being able to pick from individual species. But then from the kind of pasture ecology, my interpretation is we're better off actually mixing the plants up. And certainly when we're talking about pasture plants for mixture, they need to be quite an intimate mixture. So I'm wondering if anybody's been doing any work looking at how we kind of deal with these trade-offs. The animals would benefit more from monocultures, but the plants would benefit more from a real diversity at the plant level.
Any comment, or Juan, or any other ones? I can tell you, Merv, that we've been thinking about that. And the actual patch size that we offer to the animal, and see how far is one patch side to the other patch side with a different plant to communicate through the root system, right? As we design canopies, we can design rhizospheres, if you like. I don't know, maybe Carol knows, regard from a soil point of view, if anybody has worked on that, or how we can, you know, have in a particular place different patches over time that benefit the soil and how they communicate themselves.
I mean, one of the things that occurred to me during the presentations today is monocultures can, well, the diversity doesn't have to be equal diversity. We could have the kind of the monoculture patches, but have a very low diversity of other species in there. So it's dominated by one species, but there are still other species in there. So we could get the intimate mixture. So it's essentially playing around with a percentage of plants in a given mixture, still retain that diversity of plants, but then there's still a dominance of a single species for the livestock to be able to choose from, and whether that would still give us the benefits around the plant mixtures.
So like more like a functional patch. Go ahead, Derek. You were commenting.
Yeah, I was just thinking that one of the ideas is like you mentioned, if you have simpler patches that if you were seeding it, it might be really good. Some of the work that Fred did, I think, and Juan did as well, Fred Provenza and Juan did, is that if the animals can more readily identify patches of different species as simply as maybe as like a grass versus a clover, they may be able to mix it better than if they're seeded separately but in the same paddock. They might be able to do a better job of matching their protein demands and do better than if they're just intermixed, if you seeded them all together in one spot. Now, whether with that kind of having simple but different types of patches of material, there's some merit to that idea. And so I think some more research needs to be done on that. But I think having a mixture that allows the animals to pick a better diet.
Yeah. I got a comment from Catherine. She said this is where the research is needed to go. So any other comment?
Yeah, Derek, yes, this is what I think I mentioned a little bit in my presentation on the idea of islands of diversity in a monotonous landscape, is the idea of how we implement this. And one of the ideas was to the alternative between patches where the animal has invest less time in handling and searching, and where the potential effects of competition, I think, may outweigh the benefits of facilitation between some species. So we've been doing research on patchy landscapes where we offer diversity, but in aggregated pastures of different species. And our experience when we mix different species without much background of knowledge, that's why I think research for sure is needed, is that in many cases you end up with a monoculture across time, particularly if you graze those mixes. But maybe some conditions for some particular species that the plant-plant interaction and the plant-plant facilitation outweighs the negative effects of competition on these mixes. So I think for sure there's more need to explore assemblages of species that they may coexist and facilitate each other and potentially persist over time. That's but the general rule, I think, at least was in our experience, is that those mixes tend to converge in a monoculture over time.
Pablo, can I shift?
Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, great, thanks. Shift it slightly to the other end of the spectrum, which is, there was a conversation in the presentation that Rashmi did, and Carol was very instrumental in this, in relation to the political economy or political ecology of the system and the consequences therefore for the ways in which landscapes are managed for pastoralism. And there was a few assumptions around the lack of political power within the system from pastoralists, whereas I know from other places, for example, indigenous pastoralists within Maori pastoralists within New Zealand actually have quite a lot of power now politically. In Australia, not the Aboriginal peoples, because they were not pastoralists, but the pastoralists here have very strong power within the system. And so I think there's a diversity of power structures within the context of pastoralism, and an assumption that pastoralists are in some ways politically subordinate is not necessarily contextualized across the whole of the planet.
That's a very interesting comment, Ian, and just it'll open several other questions. We have discussed some of that with Hamish and Hirani. We got 9 minutes. Just when it was getting excited, right? So I have to share the things. Carol, now we lost you for a couple of minutes. Sorry to put you in the spot, but it would be great if you just, I try to, knowing what you are doing, what we are doing, and try to put something together of what you are doing, but it would be great if you just tell the audience what's your view on what you're working on and your article is going to be.
No, thank you, Pablo. Yeah, so look, there's the things, so we've been working on a sort of desktop study to do some sort of first generation assessment of soil sustainability and resilience. So we used data from our national soil database, and we used effectively soil quality indicators to assess resilience. We based it on some work when we you can split land into 3 classes, and we talked about land going over thresholds and then eventually going to the most highest risk category, class 3, which meant there was a change in the system, the functionality. And so we applied that to the data at Mount Grand, and we found that over half of the land was, according to this approach, had undergone a regime shift. But what we need to do now is then do some field testing to see is that actually what's happening on the ground. And I think that so the questions that I had that we talked about in the question and answer session afterwards was, while we're understanding more about our impacts on the soils, and we're actually understanding a little bit, and that will inform our management practices. So like we heard from AgriCom about the ecotane, we're coming up with a lot of ways of actually managing or mitigating our impacts. We need to, the fundamental question, the elephant in the room is, well, actually, what do we want to do with the land? Because that's going to inform how we manage it. So, are we just going to carry on as we're doing and just try and boost the soil so it's not going to be degraded? Or do we actually make a conscious decision and say, well, actually talk to the landowners and engage with the community, the tangata whenua? Do we want to have production, or do we want to put some land aside? Do we want to plant a native bush or trees? One of the things that struck me was that we need to improve carbon. If we can get more carbon into the soil, that will be good, full stop, for the health of the soil and for any sort of uses from it. And so one of the things we need to look at in our next phase of work is how can we work with microbes? How can we sequester carbon? It's not just a case of planting trees, because it's a bit difficult on Mount Grand, but it may be that we do a portion of native bush. And this is a great conversation we had with Charles Murfield on that. Or do we try and have some sort of managed production? So the key thing is, what do we want to do with this land? And that talks to that conversation just now about that social political aspects of land use. And so that's why, that can be informed by this holistic approach we're taking with Mount Grand. We're getting lots of people in. We got Hirani talking about the Maori of the area. We've got people talking about the design, and we've got people talking about the science and the grazing and the animals. So but I think the fundamental thing is, what do we want to use this land for? That's the key question for me.
That's good. Hirani, did you want to make a comment? Did I see correctly that you want to make a comment?
Sure. Look, I'd like to make just a really brief comment, and also following on from Ian's statement earlier. I suppose for me, the critical thing is, how do we place land use and grazing in its broader context? which is really, I think, what I'm saying, and it's broader context. As I said, we can talk about pasture, grazing, animal welfare, farm systems, and the rest of it, but which you've all done extremely eloquently this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening. What I'm saying is, how do we put that into a much broader social, cultural, economic, colonial, and dare I say even political context? And if we are seeking to give what I call the land a voice, the environment a voice, we cannot do that in the absence of context. And I mean, that is absolutely critical, clearly to the future, which is really why I'm saying, why I'm coining this notion of Indigenous-scape, because I think what it does is it provides an opportunity for us to contextualize what we do in its much broader context. And as Ian has indicated, there's a degree of variability clearly around the world, depending on the national experience of colonization. In this country, we've had a major treaty, so we can't separate it from the politics either. In this country, we've had a major period of what we call treaty settlements since the 1970s, and that has had a direct impact on, I think, Māori engagement around these issues, including state of the environment, for instance, and the utilisation of land, land use and planning, and how we do what we need to do, but we do it with an eye to the future. And I think that's really the nub of this whole debate, to be frank, for me. I mean, I'm not engaged in each of your respective area of research interest. I'm really on the periphery of it. But what I think I'm trying to do is help articulate an Indigenous perspective on this. And for me, it's framed in that whakatauki or proverb, ko au te whenua, ko te whenua ko au. It's about our connection with place, our connection with the knowledges that are inherent in those places, giving the land and the environment a voice. How do we best do that in order that we can better inform our management practice? Okay, well, I think that's about it from me. Otherwise, start sounding like a lecture. So don't want to do that.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, that's a nice way to start wrapping up. You know, time is not with us today. It's been with us because we need to start wrapping up. It's been a fantastic day with very interesting sessions and streams. Hopefully, this enabled us to know each other better. Several of us are working together. The whole point of this is to initiate a dialogue, right? We know what we do, we know what we want to do. So from now on, it depends on us how we can communicate amongst each other and try to install some pathways to the future.